Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Stay Curious. I'm your host, Mark Marquette. We broadcast live from the American Space Museum every day of the week, Monday through Friday, and at 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, but you can watch us anytime like you are right now on YouTube. So thank you very much. Today, a very, very special show where we're going to talk about John Glenn, a true American hero and one of my true American heroes, and I maybe the last of all the American heroes. I don't know what my co-producer Marty Winkle thinks, but he also grew up with this man, and I think you're pretty hard pressed, Marty, to find or think about someone that's not a sports figure who you would want to call an American hero. Maybe ponder on that a second, or what do you think, my friend?
Need to think about that.
Yeah, yeah. And I have got on my t-shirt, Pluto. Let me stand up there. Pluto, never forget. Okay. As we celebrated this week the 96th anniversary of Pluto being discovered by Clyde Tombaugh. This one of the probably 1,200 episodes of Stay Curious you can see on YouTube. As Marty Winkle and I are just about finishing our fifth lap around the solar system, our sixth lap around the solar system, of doing this program and starting year 7 around March 23rd. So thank you so much because you're the ones that made it this way. We're looking at the beautiful. No, we're looking at the beautiful over here. Mercury Monument out there at Spaceview Park. Great choice, Marty. I went out there today and had a sandwich sitting on the bench there in the sunshine by the shuttle monument. And I said, why don't I do this more often? And Marty's saying, well, you're acting a little nicer to me today. Maybe you ought to do it more often. So I've had a heck of a last 5-6 weeks with 4 events and all kinds of other things that going on here that occupy my time, and I'm grateful for that because it's all about you, the space geek, the space lover out there. And if you've got a story about John Glenn, please share it. I've got a beautiful story to tell at the end. Here at the beginning, I'll say that when I was putting myself through college at the Ohio State University, I was a photographer for the Associated Press called a stringer. And Senator Glenn of Ohio then was at many press conferences. I probably shot maybe a dozen press conferences or something where he was at. And I got to see his launch when I was a little boy in Winter Park. And we'll talk about that juxtaposition in space and time for me many decades ago. So, yes, we're going to talk. Marty will move that around there. We're going to talk about America's first man to orbit the Earth, John Glenn, on this date, February 20th, 1962. An Atlas rocket that was used to send unmanned spacecraft into space. I'm not going to give you all the details about everything because we want to talk about the man here. But those of you that have been to the great museums and particularly seen Mercury 7 capsule in the Udvar Hazy Smithsonian facility there, it was Freedom 7 was the name of his spacecraft, right, Marty? And they named them by a name, like a call sign name on there. Very cramped. I'm sitting in a chair here, just encased me in like a cardboard box, almost as tight as I could, with my arms reaching out. And if you're not claustrophobic, you hope the life support system worked. A Marine, born July 18th, 1921. He died December 8th, 2016 at age 95. And he was the last of the Mercury astronauts to go. Chris Calley just talked to on the phone. This is a group of stamps that he did for the Marshall Islands commemorating Glenn's flight to STS-95 in 1998. Chris did these in 98. They were part of a collection that you could buy. Those stamp collectors know Marshall Islands are famous for doing all kinds of beautiful artwork of different things. And there's a lot of interesting artwork of space out there that you can get in a big old pack of stamps like I used to out of the comic books. Chris said that this was the opening of it on the front where they had the famous 4-cent Project Mercury stamp, one of the most famous stamps of all on there. Chris, tell us who did that stamp. I'm not sure who did. I don't think it was your dad, but whoever knows who did the 4-cent stamp at the bottom, we've got envelopes with that 220 date stamped on them all over some of our our places where we keep things on there for Friendship 7, thank you Shepherds is Freedom 7, going without notes here, Jokum, so thank you for helping me with that. Then you had Friendship 7, Freedom 7, I know Face 7 was Cooper. Aurora, that was Scott Carpenter. There's Glenn in 1969, and Glenn at age 77 in 1998, the oldest human to orbit the Earth, not counting the Carmenauts, our suborbital people. No, and so that's pretty cool. 1998, gee, they're coming up on 28 years from that date in this October. Look at his nice blue eyes. He was such a congenial man. Of course, he used his fame to become a 25-year senator of Ohio. He did run for president and against Reagan. Oh, he was a Democratic pool that went against President Reagan. So, there is our Spaceview Park. The bricks are workers who gave us $100. Space workers, some famous people there, including Chris Kraft. And many of the notables like Bob Seek that support our museum. I believe Jay Honeycutt's out there, or maybe but the traditional 7 inside the symbol for the Roman god of fleetness, of speed, Mercury. Mercury was the messenger. Mercury was running around telling Zeus all what everyone was talking about behind his back, or he was Zeus's emissary to go get Hera and tell her to come over here. I'd like to talk to her about our children that are making some bad mistakes, sort of stuff. So this was a project that was begun in 1998 time frame. The founders of our U.S. Space Walk of Fame Foundation, 1888, had in mind that they would have a museum, but to honor the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo astronauts was their main thrust. That is indeed the Indian River. Max Brewer Bridge is in the back. And I'll show you something here, Marty, and then we'll go small. I believe about right in here is where the Artemis launch pad would be. Pad 39B is somewhere right here next behind that gazebo. And I don't see any electric towers there, but that's where Artemis is right there. It might be a little further to the right, but you get the idea. You can see it clearly from Titusville, the best place to watch the launch. John Herschel Glenn Jr. Marty, I'm always awestruck by the juniors. I think all but one of the Mercury astronauts was a junior. Many of the Gemini astronauts were named after their father. And an unusual number of them are also the firstborn of the family. These hands were cast in clay. They actually had to pound the astronauts' hands down a little bit to get a good impression. Some resisted that, others went for it. Yeah, I got a good deep impression where you can see his palm lines and stuff like that. And then that cast was taken to the foundry where they poured a very heavy. I need to weigh those. They weigh about 40 pounds. How did John Glenn get to be an astronaut? All right. When he was selected in 1959. Well, I want to tell you something first about John Glenn here. Cambridge, Ohio. All right. His dad was a plumber. His mom was a teacher. The family moved to New Concord, Ohio. Now, this is in the rolling part of Ohio that's a lot like northern Kentucky that it abuts. It's a southeast Ohio. He delivered the Columbus Dispatch newspaper. New Concord celebrates him, as does Cambridge, Ohio, where he was born. Excuse me. He went into the Air Force. He enlisted in the Army Air Corps. Okay, and he became a fighter uh, in the Air Force of Flying. I'm trying to make sure I keep. They used the F-4U Corsair in '43, and I'm looking for his time in. But his time in space as a Mercury astronaut was 5 hours. His time in space on the shuttle was almost 10 days. So he's got a full 10 days in space there in his career. World War II and Korean War veteran, got the Flying Cross, the Air Medal. All right, so and we're going to talk a little about that here in just a second as we talk about who his wingman was. But one of the things that got him to be the astronaut was he set the world record flight. All right, let me pull this up here now. In July 1957, Glenn made the first supersonic transcontinental flight. All right. Disliking his Bureau of Aeronautics desk job, he devised the flight as both a way to keep flying and publicly demonstrate the F-8U Crusader jet. At the time, the transcontinental speed record was held by an Air Force Republic F-84 Thunderjet, for all of you aviation aficionados out there. It was 3 hours and 45 minutes. Glenn calculated the F-8U Crusader could do it faster. It was faster than a .45 caliber bullet, so Glenn called the flight Project Bullet. He went from Los Alamos, California, to Floyd Bennett Field in New York in 3 hours, 23 minutes, and 8 seconds, with 3 refuelings when speeds dropped below 300 miles an hour. So he's going over 580 miles an hour. His onboard camera took continuous transcontinental panoramic photos of the U.S. It made him a minor celebrity. He was profiled in the New York Times, appeared on a television show, Name That Tune. Yeah, he was on the show Name That Tune. He was also in Guess My Line, I think. Glenn, so this was big. This is the letter of a telegram in this airplane that when Glenn landed, the band was there to play for him. Either that or the takeoff. I've figure that out. And there's the accommodations for Glenn. California New York, like a bullet. So he shaved off 20 minutes in from 3 hours 45 to 3 hours 23. Yep, 22 minutes shaved off there. How about that? So you all that are big flyers from New York to California, I'm not sure what that takes if I was on Daniel de Jong's jet that he flies. So very interesting. Now he was famous even before he was chosen as an astronaut. So that solidified some of his fame. Now, why do I show you a baseball card of the greatest baseball player of all time? You want to argue with me about that, Marty? You want to fight about that?
No, I won't do that.
Good. Well, a lot of people don't even know who Ted Williams is. Switch hitter. He has some of the greatest records in baseball, the top 10 of home runs and hits and on-base percentage, blah, blah, blah. And he was out of action 3 years during the Korean War, 3 years of his prime. He was the wingman of John Glenn. All right, there's a book about it, The Unlikely, Unusual, and Unbreakable Friendship Between John Glenn and Teddy Ball Williams, okay? And there's a picture in that book of them being aviators. He was already a famous baseball player, but to risk your life as a jet fighter pilot, okay, when you're already destined maybe to a Hall of Fame baseball career, that's what World War II is all about, though, Marty. It was the a battle for world freedom. And there they are later in life there on there. So, well, what wouldn't you love to just hear those guys talk? Marty, go ahead.
Yeah, I got a couple things. First, I don't think Ted Williams was a switch hitter.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll go with that.
Yeah. And the other thing is talking about John Glenn in the Air Force. He flew 27 combat missions in Korea as an exchange pilot with the Air Force, but he was still in the Marine Corps.
Oh, okay.
and so was Ted Williams.
Yeah. All right, good. Thank you, Marty. Hoorah. Thanks for adding that. He shot down 3 MiG-15s, was awarded 6 Distinguished Flying Crosses and 18 Air Medals. All right. He was pretty at the top of the class there. And, we'll show the pictures of it here. So there he is in training. Okay. Well, I like looking at the minutia of things that I like. And you know that I've become a little knowledgeable in memorabilia. And I want to keep showing out something here. See on his chest plate, his chest there is a circular mirror. And that circular mirror shows the control panel. All right, of course, in reverse, but during the film, the 1 frame a second film that's going to be shot in space, they can see if the switches are right and so forth. And I would love to see one of those. I've never seen one. I would up close. I've never seen one in a museum yet. Even the Smithsonian, I was looking for it, not saying I missed it. He doesn't have it on in this. All right, but you're very cramped. And between your legs was a periscope, and you would look down between the periscope, okay, and this was this was going to be that you're looking down a periscope at the Earth as you're going, so that they could see at 8 power, I think was the periscope, or one little telescope. Uh, t- uh, there was a military connotation for that, but they didn't have a window. And that was something that they all argued about, was we want to have a window to look out as well as down through this periscope. Well, when they rehearsed, they would look down the periscope and to test, and have something. Maybe this is an elevated 20 feet on another gantry inside the building on the 3rd floor, and they'd look down and see what details of a map or something they could see. And one day, this was there for John Glenn to see. It's you and me, John baby, against the world. Friendship is down at the bottom there with this racy cartoon done by C.C. Bibby. C.C. Bibby was the lady that put the Friendship 7 on the side of the spacecraft and all the other spacecrafts. And we have this in our museum, okay, and she did this for Carpenter. We also have Carpenters too, and there is a color version of this. So he went to C.C. Bibby and says, "Hey, I really like that. I might not be the Boy Scout you think everybody thinks I am." So, little joke there. There's the big 3. Okay, Gus Grissom, Alan Shepard, and John Glenn. You can see each one a little more different size of each one. Okay. Who was going to be the first American to go into outer space, which would be known forever as that. And then who's going to be the first one to orbit? Okay. And Gus didn't care that much. He wanted to fly. I think Shepard really did care, and probably Glenn. There's 60 years of stuff to read about this, okay? But they were highly touted as this was the trio. The other 3, okay, which would have been Wally Schirra, Gordon Cooper, and Scott Carpenter. All right, they're out of the picture here. They know that they're going to be the second wave, but maybe they're more satisfied because one of them's probably going to get to spend a day in space. So I wouldn't mind being Gordon Cooper and having spent all that time in space, or Wally Schirra did 6 orbits, I think, and Scott Carpenter just duplicated what Glenn did in 3 orbits. There's the Friendship 7 going on there. C.C. Bibby's not in there, but and then there is the side. That's why I put this in here. Look at this after it came back from space with President Kennedy looking at it. I put on there. Got Vice President and future President Johnson in the background. And yes, there's a big controversy about having the chimpanzees going them. Astronauts in a can. There was all kinds of, hey, they've got chimps doing your job, would be some of the insults by some people in there. And that's Mark Thel points out of the 7 Mercury astronauts, Deke Slayton, of course, didn't. He was grounded and then become the very influential chief of the astronaut staff. Let me go to some good comments here. Let's see what we got going here. Jim McDade says Ted was the greatest. Okay, he had his name on all his Sears Little League equipment. I appreciate that. Uh, uh, and some other comments that, yeah, Glenn was not a very educated engineer, that's for sure. But boy, did he have the right stuff, as they say, according to Wikipedia. Steve Joachim says the 4-cent Project Mercury stamp was designed by Charles Chuckering, Bureau of Engraving and Printing. Thank you for that. And he was good friends with Glenn. Yeah, Glenn was a Democrat. I failed to mention that. And Williams was a conservative Republican. And Carlton says Ted Williams attended the STS-95, which Carlton photographed. While everyone was crowding around listening to him and Tom Brokaw, I was a few feet away talking to and interviewing Jimmy Buffett. No one recognized Jimmy Buffett except for me. Well, of course. That's excellent, Carlton. And Mitch Rothman, who will be on our program a week from Monday. He says, I met John Glenn and his family at the 50th anniversary of his flight. And Scott Carpenter's daughter also attended. And Apollo 12 Command Module pilot Dick Gordon emceed that. And you can go to NASA Manned Space and see that picture of Mitch with the great John Glenn. Well, let's move this along here a little bit there. I know you guys know about the monkeys. Astronauts driving Corvettes? Hot John Glenn. He did have a convertible, Plymouth, I think, or something like that. Now, some of the legacy signs, I look in the background there. There he is suiting up. He's got a watch or something here on his right. I'm not a scuba diver either. I don't know if that'd be something about that. And here is the famous walk. The famous walk down the aisle. You've got the doctor there. I meant to write the name down. I think his name is Williams in the middle. And then you've got the great suit tech Jack Schmidt, pioneering the suit tech on the right. And Glenn does have that convex mirror, actually, on his chest. Nick Thomas supplied these pictures of his talk. Complex 14, what it looks like today, where Glenn was launched. Getting into Friendship 7, tight quarters. Of course, you got Gunter Wendt there helping them in. The great, the pad Fuhrer, later pad leader. There's that mirror right there, I'm telling you. We have something, a couple things we'll show you that's in our museum. It's way cool. And the famous launch of it. And you space geeks out there, if you're like me, you try to memorize what the cloud looks like in the back, Marty, so you can figure out launches different from each other. And most of them were in the morning time of day. On top of an intercontinental ballistic missile that could have a nuclear warhead on it aimed at Moscow. Instead, it's got a human inside of it. And it was incredible to see. And I did see it as a young man. Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, there's several comments, Mark. One from Tom Usiak, who says that these were set to fly after Glenn and was replaced by Scott Carpenter. Mark Thell is saying that thing you were looking at, that's the suit pressure gauge.
Okay, thank you.
And Mark Thell said the doctor was Dr. Bill Douglas. And Tom Usiak is saying Deke was going to name his capsule Delta 7.
Okay. All right. Thank you all. Good exchange of comments here. And a lot of great space geeks on the show today. So thank you all for giving your respects to John Glenn. February 20th is ingrained in my memory banks like July 20th, 1969. And if you don't have that in your memory banks, go ahead and change the channel. That, of course, is the Apollo 11 moon landing date. There's a look down the road to the pad that's no longer there. So much of that is now ancient history. There's the blockhouse, though, and we have a recreation of that blockhouse and other blockhouses like that here in our gallery. It was a blockhouse because they were about 600 feet away from the rocket. Why so close? I was told because electricity wouldn't conduct further along a copper line than about 600 feet. And then they put a little booster on those electrons, and they got out to a quarter mile and build a B pad at some of these, like at 36A and B. And another little trivia note, the inside out door, wherever it would be in there, was zigzagged. Now, I'm not sure what the steps are going up on top of this one. Marty, can you explain that? There's no ground level entrance. I know the ground level entrance has zigzag hallways, so the gases or shrapnel would not just go right inside the building. But would that be obviously an observation deck of some brave person up there with the lightning posts? Picture of John Glenn in his seat at the during the time, okay, of his launch. This is from the camera that did 1 frame a second, okay, to record anything that would happen. There is that mirror right there. See what I'm talking about? I am obsessing over this because there's so many cool minutia things, particularly when you see like 40 auctions like I have that we've had. Now, also what you want to know here, there's a camera over here off his right shoulder there. All right, this is his oxygen coming in and carbon dioxide being vented out. He couldn't move around, folks. He is just strap him into the chair. All right, he is strapped in there. He may have loosened his harness a little bit, maybe not. But by golly, he didn't experience weightlessness in moving around, nor did the 10 Gemini flights, except the EVA walkers. So by the time we got into a spacious Apollo spacecraft, they witnessed space sickness. Frank Borman was very sick on the way to the moon on Apollo 8. And Rusty Schweickart got space sickness on Apollo 9 and had to curtail some of the experiments he wanted to do with the spacesuit in Earth orbit and the lunar LEM. And John Glenn drank some water, and then he ate out of a tube some applesauce. And that's the first time an American ate something in applesauce. Now, before Glenn's launch, a year earlier was, of course, Yuri Gagarin did one orbit, and then Germain Titov, about 6 months later, spent a whole day in space. And here we were crawling with our first man in space, goes three orbits, or about 4.5 hours. So a lot of footage of Glenn there, looking around and experiencing no abnormalities. Okay, he took the faceplate off, but it was really till we got up there a day that you knew how your bodily functions would work, as well as could you sleep in space. One of the coolest covers of a National Geographic magazine. Marty, why don't you remind people under 40 what the National Geographic magazine was?
It was almost like a mini almanac that came out once a month.
Yeah.
It covered several different.
Into the Renaissance thinking or intelligent people, that was a lot of education in there. It was like a little mini class of everything from. It was celebrating places that normal people couldn't go and see creatures and structures and nature like no one else. Yes, Marty.
Got a question from Mark Bell. Whatever happened to the handle that was attached to the capsule that the astronauts used to get into the Mercury capsule?
Well, I'll bet Steve Jokums would know something about that. That handle, of course, was removed for them to get in there. That was just for that. And Gunter Vent's crew would go over there and take it off. But somebody's got one on their man cave mantle there. And there were fixtures like that. There were also some fixtures they put on later, handrails to hold them in space on spacewalks. So, yep, a lot of us own that copy of the National Geographic. That's sort of like a space geek. You need to have this in your collection, and why not? And you can buy them. Well, people are just throwing away things left and right like that, but you'll find it, and don't pay more than $10 for it. We've got some laying around here. We probably need to package up and put out. Why do I show this picture? Because you all think about the Where you go, what's that? That doesn't look like it. Well, this is the deployment of uh, the inflatable retro pack cushion. And when it re-entered the Earth's atmosphere on its fiery re-entry, it also then the heat shield dropped off, and then this cushioned the impact. I don't think the heat shield dropped off, but I'm not sure about that. And here's the button that Glenn pushed to activate that system. Now, one of the big dramas was that they didn't tell Glenn, and he was mad about it, and they rewrote some of the code of conduct between flight directors talking to astronauts orbiting the Earth, is that they were worried that this had jarred, this whole system here had jarred during launch, and there were some sensors that it was maybe trying to come out like this. And so the reentry pack, the three reentry thrusters are solid rockets that slowed him down to come in, were supposed to be ejected. And they told him to not eject the retro pack. And he asked why. And they didn't tell him why. And later they heard from him, you need to tell me why, damn it. I have, landed a plane on fire and blah, blah, blah. He got shot at and everything else in Korea. So Chris Kraft got a different set of protocols done because of this. But his famous words were, boy, that sure is a fireball outside the window, is when he broke out of it and everybody giving a sigh of relief that he was okay. This is how you would get out of it if the hatch was not opened so that you wouldn't fill it up with water. Okay. And this is what Scott Carpenter did on the next of the flight when he did 3 orbits. He had to get out of his spacecraft because Scott Carpenter was like 600 miles downrange because of not his own fault. Scott Carpenter's problem was a horizon alignment indicator was off. And though they tried to blame his little sightseeing, looking around and trying to fly the vehicle to see more of the night sky and the Earth. But that's was how Scott would have got out of that with a raft that he pushed out of that in there. And of course, they had a great party. Of course, President Kennedy there, the spacecraft, another one being built at the Manned Spacecraft Center here at Kennedy Space Center. And that is indeed the famous Hangar S, where the primates were, the astronauts were, the training was. Then the astronauts said, well, you don't want to smell those chimpanzees and stuff anymore. And they bought a Holiday Inn that is still a legendary spot. What is it, La Quinta now, Marty?
I think so. But Mark, that's actually the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station.
It says Hangar S at the top,
Yeah,
Marty.
Hangar S, but it's on Cape Canaveral Air Force Station.
It is on Cape Canaveral property. I always cross that line, and he slaps my hand every time. It's not a Kennedy Space Center. Thank you, Marty. That is correct. It is a Cape Canaveral, now called Space Force Station. Big differentiation, for sure, particularly the money spent there. And America had a new hero, and there's his wife, Annie. Quite a love story. They met in elementary school, okay, in Ohio, and she stayed there. She lived to be, I think, almost 100 years old. And one thing about her is that she, New Concord would be the school where they met. And she had a speech impediment, stutter, that was kind of, nothing she could overcome. So she was kind of one of the quiet ladies in there. But the big parade in Washington, D.C., of course, it had to rain. But America had a new hero. And John Glenn never flew again because NASA didn't want to lose their most important PR person. And he did a few things, and then he went into politics and got elected as a Democratic Senator of Ohio and was in that job for over 25 years. And that's where I saw him a few times. Now, this is in our collection. This is a glove that you fit over your hand. At the top is a battery put in there. And here's 2 wheat bulbs and the fingertips of the battery. This came about because John Glenn said, Well, wait a minute, guys. I'm going to be 90 minutes in sunlight, 90 minutes in darkness, and you don't have any lights in here. There were no illuminated dials in those days, stuff like that. So there was no real light in there because they didn't want to waste the energy and the battery power. And so when it was night, they said, okay. And they came up with this glove for him to slip on. And he flipped a 9-volt battery. And this is the prototype of it. And see, there's a bulb right there. And the other pointer finger has a bulb in it. And one of our most famous relics that I like here is the button that pushed John Glenn. Okay, there's the button that pushed John Glenn. And we've got his hard hat in here. You'll see the hard hat in a minute. But this actual button was in a console, and this is the button pushed by T.J. O'Malley, test conductor on Atlas missile that placed Mercury Atlas 7. Don't lose your mind, Steve. Joe comes there. It is Mercury Atlas 6, and that was wrong. And on the piece we have in the museum, we explained that that's corrected to MA7 on the back of this. So February 20th, 1962. All right, there is John Glenn's hard hat. Oh, I didn't pull that picture up. Thought I did of our console back there. Again, isn't that cool? It was in a big console. Of course, it wasn't in this wood thing. And as the story goes, from the great Lee Solid, who passed away and was one of the designers of this Rocketdyne engine, that they all went into the blockhouse, he and another guy with a screwdriver in hand, to take this historic button out of the console and keep it for posterity. And somebody had already got it. And that was probably T.J. O'Malley. So it ended up at the U.S. Astronaut Hall of Fame, not too far from here. That's now a Lockheed Martin place. Very distinct looking building. Many of you have been to that over the years, including myself. And when that closed down, we got it. So it's very cool to have it here in our museum. And the hard hat John Glenn won, picture of him showing that. Our provenance is very important. There he is getting ready. Wait, he's America hero. He's going back to space? Yeah. John Glenn is in excellent health at age 77. And this is much like Marty. Marty, you could go to space at your age, I'm convinced, if you wanted to.
Me too.
Yep, he could. He really could. Glenn at 77 had an annual checkup at Johnson Space Center. That's a big perk of being an astronaut, is you get a free exam. And I mean, everything's examined because everything was examined before. So he is in very good health. He said, why don't I go up there and be a guinea pig, all right, and do all kinds of geriatric type experiments to see about, anything that we could help the senior citizens of the world. And so that he did. And there he is getting suited up for STS 95, October 98. Carlton Bailey watching. We've had a show or two on that with CB. Kurt Brown was the commander, who kept having to remind everybody in the press there's 6 other astronauts going to space with Senator Glenn. And there he is in space, talking about willing to be a guinea pig. Yeah, he was. Okay, pretty cool of him, I think, to want to go through all of this. And I have a little inkling about what age 77 is going to look like for me. And I guarantee you, I ain't going to outer space, okay? And Marty, I know he could. Hello there, Ophelia. How you doing there? Good to see you watching us today. And there he is doing more experiments. Almost 10 days in space. How rewarding had that to be for him? I mean, my gosh, the fanfare, the fame of being the Mercury 7 astronauts. They were truly on a pedestal. And for him to parlay that into a political career, he was a moderate Democrat, I would say, Marty, wouldn't you? He didn't have a lot of major bills with his name on it, and he wasn't a big vocal loudmouth on the Hill at all. But he was John Glenn, meek, mild, and brave. And there's his space capsule in the Smithsonian up there. And with that, I hope you've enjoyed that show about John Glenn here. And I don't see anybody that says they met him. Thel says, yeah, the heat shield stayed on the capsule after landing. Um, uh, and one of the John Glenn coverage has one of Paul Kelly's pictures on the front. I believe I may be mistaken. I'm not sure what that means, Carlton, but doesn't matter. He had an eye chart. Uh, why, uh, why don't you do that comment there of Mitch Rothman? That's a good one, Mitch.
And Glenn also had an eye chart on the spacecraft to test his vision. It was unknown at the time whether extended time spent in orbit in zero G would change the shape of the eye and affect vision.
Uh-huh.
That's something I always talk about when I do my tours.
Yeah. Okay. Well, 60. This is 62. All right. This is 26. So this is 64 years ago. This happened, and here is yours truly, 64 years ago, on Cocoa Beach. I think Mom took us out there after church. It looks like we lived in Winter Park, Florida. My father was a champion go-kart racer and bought interest in Checker go-kart track in Orlando. And that lasted a year. My mom was a farm girl from Ohio, and she really didn't like it down here. Missed her friends more than she enjoyed the beach. But she's a good mom and took us out to the beach all the time. Me and my brother and my little sister. Well, I'm the oldest. So that's me, huh? Pretty cool looking kid, huh, Marty?
Yeah, he had a lot of hair.
A lot of dark hair up there. Still posing though. See, I wasn't even a photographer yet, and I knew how to pose. Why do I show you this picture? Because the scenario was I was in second grade, I guess, and they would pull. John Glenn had about 10 delays, I think. All right, a lot of delays in his launch. Few weather, few problems with the rocket, maybe the spacecraft. So we thought he was going to go in the morning, every morning, and they would get all the kids in school in the cafeteria, wheel out on AV crates, these big TVs, black and white TVs, and then they'd have the scrub. And this happened twice, I remember. And then after the scrub, school was over, and we would go out, and there'd be an ice cream vendor outside high school, outside our elementary school, and I could get a creamsicle for 10 cents, Marty. That was a big deal, was to have Mom to give you a dime every day, or like 30 cents, 20 cents for lunch and 10 cents for ice cream. So, 2 scrubs. I wake up the morning of February 20th, and guess what? I have the mumps. Fever, throat swollen. I've got the mumps. And so I stayed at home with my little brother Craig and my mom. And we watched Walter Cronkite launch at 9:30 in the morning on TV. And then I went out in the backyard, and I'll never forget seeing it go up above the tree line. And I turned to my mom and I said, "There's a man on that, Mom. There's a man on that." And so I really thought I'd be seeing rocket launches all my life. So sort of like maybe I'm thinking of the quarterback for Miami that just made it to one Super Bowl early in his career, Dan Marino. You make a Super Bowl at like age 23 or 4, you think you're going to be in 30, 10 more. But I never saw another launch until I moved here on the Space Coast 8 years ago and saw Falcon 9. Though I tried to see some shuttle launches, and they always got delayed when I was down here to see those. So my story is that I became a photographer at a newspaper, and then I went to college at the Ohio State University as an AP stringer, making $30 an assignment. Not too bad of money in 1970s, but do 2 or 3 assignments a week. That would help pay my rent and stuff like that. I probably did like 8 or 9 a week actually. So John Glenn was a senator. I was covering press conference of him several times, but he would usually just be there and leave. But at this one press conference, Governor James Rhodes of Ohio had a spread of food. It was some special occasion. I don't even know what Glenn was talking about. And the governor was up there talking. And he said, "For all of you in the media here, stick around. I've got some food for you. We got hamburgers and French fries and chocolate malts from my friend Dave Thomas, who's starting a new restaurant he's going to name after his daughter, Wendy. And that's Wendy's, okay? And actually, the whole Wendy's is like the Wilson's hamburger in my hometown of Findlay, Ohio, square hamburger and everything. So we're all eating, and I maneuvered over by John Glenn's table. Where a couple other people that were, I mean, I'm 22, 23 years old at this time. And the older senior photographer, I was the only AP photographer there, all right, but I had UPI, Reuters, and those guys were Reuters, Columbus Dispatch. We were all sitting around John Glenn. I was going to make sure I was going to be the last one. And here's a picture I took at that press conference. And so I was one of the last ones, and I said, Mr. Glenn, I said, Senator Glenn, I said, I know you've heard it 1,000 times, but may I tell you my story of your launch to space? And he chuckled, and he said, more like 100,000 times, but yes, tell me. And I said, I woke up with the mumps, and and watched outside, and it was the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. And this dear, nice man looked at me right in the eyes, and he said, well, it was better you than me got the mumps that day. And then he pushed his chair away and said, good luck with your photography. I mean, I will never, ever forget that encounter. Probably my favorite encounter of any famous people. And I've shook a few presidents' hands and some big time sports people. But that's how this man was. And I just want you to know that his character was true. He commanded the room when he walked in. Oh, my God. I would be at a presser. 300 people would be there at something. And everyone just stopped talking. And they knew that he was going to come up to the podium or whatever. So magnetic, people like that. And to be around them was my job to get it on. And that's a very proud AP-style photos. You get them doing something. He raised his hand. If he would have drank water, adjust his glasses, I'm clicking away with 24 frames on my. And I remember saying, oh, my God, I've only got like 8 frames left. I've got to get another shot for the evening paper before he leaves, because I had to get a morning and an PM cycle for the papers at the time. So a lot went into photography back then. I think more thinking about the process than is today. So here's a picture of Glenn at the airport with that's Howard Metzenbaum in the center, and Mondale, who ran for president. I think even against Glenn as a Democrat at the airport. But why I love this picture is the Secret Service man looking at me, photographing Glenn. And that was always an attraction because my boss gave me a nice long lights lens, either a 300 or a 600 millimeter lens. And they were kind of unassuming. Drove a lot of attention when I grabbed that out of my camera bag. And boy, he is looking at me wondering, no, what's that guy got in his hand right there? So I also printed all of these there, Tommy Usiak. And the fixer has maintained its integrity. 64. These were taken in 1978, I'd say, that time frame. So, thank you for letting me share my personal experience with John Glenn. Of course, in this museum, I couldn't resist one day helping with the cases to put my DNA on top of John Glenn's, and in the background are some of the pictures of things that we honor the mission of Mercury on this date. February 20th. Chris Calley has done this illustration that is remarkable, him capturing the realism on this stamp that he did for Marshall Islands. Okay, the Republic of Marshall Islands. This is our first day issue. And I want that in my collection, Chris. And John Glenn himself. Nice rendition of the man himself there with the earth behind there. And Chris said these were done in 1998 to commemorate Glenn on his historic mission there. You see October 29th, 1998 there. So if you're a stamp collector, something that you must have in your collection about John Glenn, American hero. So honored and privileged to have been near him and even talked to him. And it's an experience I'll never forget in my life. And I believe all you space geeks, a lot of your, if you're a baby boomer, certainly his flight had to have spurred in you your interest in outer space and so forth. And then redoing it to another generation in 1998. So thank you all for letting me share this today. February 20th, 1962, another important date in space history. Should go right there with July 20th, 1969, and Moon Day, when man did leave the bonds of Earth. And that's what this was all about. Glenn's flight was to figure out, could we even fulfill President Kennedy's pledge to go to the moon before the end of the decade? So appreciate a Friday. TGIF, Gary Gerald, thank you for watching. Mostly Parked. Jim McDade is in, Mostly Parked is local. Gary's in Georgia. Jim is in Huntsville, Alabama. Tom Usiak up in Pennsylvania. Tom Celentano up in Connecticut. I think some are getting more snow and others are getting 60 degrees. Mitch Rothman, he's basking down there at Lake Wales, in the middle of our state there. Doug Forrest up there in Los Angeles, over there in Los Angeles. Dougie, any kind of update on Endeavor? We'd love to hear from you, brother. Shoot me some info on that. And Carlton Bailey, he launched, we had a night launch the other day, about 8 o'clock. I didn't even think about it, all right? He had not one but two cameras out there streaking. You got to watch that streaking, Carlton. I'm telling you, the neighbors are wise to it. Steve Jokums, he is building a model for us of the Soyuz rocket and spaceship so that we can show this at Shuttle Fest here. Thank you, Steve. Also got a Mir space station model or two here in the house that you don't have to bring. But it's fun to watch him build this from scratch. Ophelia Sauterelle in Paris, or not Paris, she's in La Trousse, France. And RG Jubilee, Rosalie, you stay healthy and happy as always on this wonderful Florida weekend where we're going to be kicking into the 80s. And Marty's going to be wearing shorts and a tank top, hitting that white ball around the golf course, right, buddy? Not except for the tank top.
I was just going to say that, without a tank top.
And folks, remember, Pluto, never forget. All right. Became a planet 96 years ago and demoted 20 years ago. But that's okay. Pluto doesn't know. And it is also one of the most fabulous objects in our solar system that we got to keep watching. So thank you all for watching us. Tell other people to do the same, as this is an important outreach part of the American Space Museum. Not only that, it's a whole lot of fun with all you watching and being part of my life every day. So love y'all. Y'all be safe. Enjoy your weekend. And until next week, I'm Mark Marquette saying, I can't wait to see you again to bridge the space between us.
It is a wrap. 53 minutes and 10 seconds. That was a good show.
Thank you.
Mr. Park said great memories and
Yeah.
several comments like that.
Good.